Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Allah said in the Quran, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٌ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ, that there is nothing in resemblance to Allah whatsoever, whilst Allah is all hearing and all seeing. And this is something the scholars called al-tanzihu ma'al ithbat, negating what does not befit Allah whilst affirming what Allah affirms for Himself. So in this verse, Allah affirms for Himself the qualities of hearing and sight, and He negates for Himself any type of resemblance of Himself to creation. So this is what this verse says, and this is the principle of Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah when understanding the different verses of Allah. So when Allah, for example, says the hand of Allah or the face of Allah, it's not to be understood on its literal. Why? Because a literal hand is a body part, and a body part is something that's physical, and everything that's physical is in resemblance to each other because they're all made up of atoms. So if you were to say Allah has a literal hand, you're essentially saying that Allah has a hand that's made up of atoms. This is what that statement means. However, if you negate that Allah has atoms, you say, oh no, Allah doesn't have atoms, then you automatically negate Allah having a literal hand. Because if you say Allah doesn't have atoms, then He's not physical. And if He's not physical, He has no physical body parts. And if He has no physical body parts, He cannot have a literal hand. This is what that statement means. Now, the Salafis take the exact same principle, and or so they say. This is, you can see on Ibn Uthaymin's commentary of Al-Aqidatul Wasitiyah, where he says that وَكَلِمَةُ شَيْءٌ نَكِرَةٌ فِي سِيَاقِ النَّفِي, that the word shay, when Allah says لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٌ, that word shay'un is a word that is unspecified in the context of a negation, which means Allah is saying there is nothing similar to Allah at all. There's nothing at all. And so He says فَتَعُمُّ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ, that it encompasses everything, that there is nothing at all similar to Allah, right? He says لَيْسَ شَيْءٌ مِثْلَهُ أَبَدًا عَزَّ وَجَلَّ أَيِّ مَخْلُوقٍ وَإِنْ عَظُمْ, that no matter the creation, no matter how great this creation is, it does not resemble Allah, right? So this principle would lead a person to not affirm a physical or a literal hand for Allah, because by saying that you affirm a literal hand for Allah, you're affirming that type of physicality, and all physical beings are in resemblance to each other by default. This is the way we understand things. This is science. This is the real world around us. But the Salafis contradict this when they say that Allah has literal body parts, and what this shows is that they don't understand basic science. They don't understand how to not contradict their own principles, or they just don't understand what it means to say that Allah has a literal hand. And this is actually very clear, because you can ask a Salafi, okay, what does a hand mean? Because, we give the definition. We say a hand is a limb of a body. That's what a hand is. And a limb of a body is, part of the body, and parts are physical and whatnot. So we can define it, but when it comes to them and we ask them, okay, what's a hand? The Salafis will just say, well, a hand is understood by the language. And you say, okay, well, define it for me. Suppose I don't know anything. I don't know the language. I don't know, just teach me what a hand is. And they'll say, well, it's just understood from the language. And they won't define it, because they know that in that definition, it means something that's physical. And if you try and attribute that physical thing to Allah, then you're attributing something that is deficient for Allah. Allah is not a physical being. So they try to stay away from that, even though that's what they actually believe when they say that Allah has a literal hand. So they don't say it with their tongues, but they believe it with their hearts. Anyhow, the last thing that I wanted to mention is the confusion as well of the Salafis when they say things like, we affirm Allah has the attribute of a literal hand. What's an attribute of a literal hand? Nobody says a body part is an attribute of mankind. This is the confusion between an attribute and, a physical body part, right? The attribute is sight. My eyes are the body part by which I see. My ears are the body part. Hearing is my attribute. So when Allah says that He is all hearing and all seeing, then He's affirming the attributes and the qualities that don't necessitate any type of resemblance to His creation. It doesn't necessitate any type of resemblance to say that Allah is all hearing and all seeing. There's no physicality to that. There's no resemblance to mankind if we say that Allah's hearing encompasses all things and mankind's hearing does not encompass all things. There's no resemblance there. But in the very definition of eyes, for example, we say that Allah has the quality of sight, but He does not have literal eyes. And this is taken from this very verse where He says, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٌ. So He negated all types of literal physical eyes from Himself, وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ, whilst He is all hearing and all seeing. So He affirms the quality of seeing, but He says, I see without eyes. In other words, I don't need eyes to see. So this is Allah affirming His independence and His perfection in this verse, and this is how Ahlus Sunnah has understood it, contrary to how the Salafis of today understand it, when they contradict their own principles, as we saw that they also say this principle, but they don't put it into practice when they say that Allah has literal body parts. So when you see Allah saying in the Quran, hands of Allah, or the face of Allah, or this or that, these things are not taken on their literal, and Allah does not have literal body parts, because Allah said in the Quran, "Laysa kamithlihi shay'un," that there is nothing like Allah, nothing in resemblance to Allah, nothing similar to Allah, wa huwa as-sami'ul basir, whilst Allah is the most perfect and He has these attributes, He does not have physical body parts. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.